let me say this first, very clearly. When a man pulls away, it does not automatically mean he stopped caring, lost interest, or found someone else. I know that's where your mind often goes, because silence feels personal, distance feels like rejection, and uncertainty hurts more than the truth. But as a man speaking honestly to women, I want to give you insight most men never explain out loud, not because they want to deceive you, but because they don't have the language for what happens inside them. This series is not about teaching you how to chase men or decode every message. It's about understanding the emotional mechanics behind male withdrawal, so you can stop questioning your worth and start responding from strength, clarity, and self-respect. Now let's begin where it usually starts. First, when a man pulls away, most women immediately assume one thing: there must be another woman. From my experience as a man, I can tell you that's not the most common reason. The most common reason is emotional overload. Men are not raised to process emotions the way women are. When feelings deepen, when attachment forms, when expectations quietly rise, many men don't feel excitement first. They feel pressure. Not pressure from you specifically, but from what the connection now represents. He starts to sense responsibility. He notices that his replies matter more, that his presence affects your mood, that his consistency is being observed. Even if you never say a word about it, he feels it. And for a man who hasn't fully anchored his emotional capacity yet, that feeling can be overwhelming. So what does he do? He creates space, not because he wants to hurt you, not because he's playing games, but because distance gives him the illusion of control when emotions feel bigger than his ability to manage them. From your side, this looks confusing. 1 week, he's engaged, attentive, warm. The next, he's quieter, slower, less available. You start replaying conversations in your head, wondering where you misstepped. But from his side, there often isn't a specific moment where everything changed. There's just a growing internal tension between wanting connection and fearing emotional responsibility. Here's something many women don't hear enough. Men often pull away not when they feel nothing, but when they feel too much and don't trust themselves to handle it properly. And when a woman responds to this distance with urgency, asking for clarity, reassurance, emotional explanations, it can unintentionally increase the pressure he's already trying to escape. He doesn't hear care, he hears expectation. He doesn't feel closeness, he feels obligation. This is where your power actually begins. A man who pulls away due to emotional overwhelm is not asking you to chase him. He is unconsciously testing whether you remain centered, grounded, and self-respecting even when his energy shifts. When you don't panic, when you don't collapse into self-doubt, when you allow space without disappearing yourself, you communicate something very important: emotional strength. And emotional strength is what allows a man to return willingly, not defensively. Distance, when read correctly, is information. And what you do with that information determines everything. Second, another reason men pull away, and this one is rarely talked about, is when a man feels he is slowly losing himself inside the connection. This doesn't happen because a woman is doing something wrong. It happens because many men don't know how to stay connected and remain grounded in who they are at the same time. From the outside, everything may look fine. He enjoys talking to you. He likes your presence. He feels understood. But internally, something subtle starts to shift. His routines change. His alone time shrinks. His mental space feels occupied. And without realizing it, he begins to associate closeness with a loss of freedom rather than a gain in intimacy. This is where many women misunderstand what's happening. When a man values a woman, he doesn't just see her as a companion. He sees her as a responsibility. And if he hasn't yet built a strong sense of identity, purpose, or direction in his own life, intimacy can feel like something that consumes him instead of complements him. So he pulls back to breathe. Not because you're too much, but because he doesn't yet feel like enough. I want you to hear this clearly. A man pulling away at this stage is often trying to reclaim his sense of autonomy, not escape you. He wants to feel like a man again, capable, self-directed, in control of his time and energy. Distance becomes his way of reminding himself that he still exists outside the relationship. From your side, this can feel deeply personal. You may think, if I mattered more, he wouldn't need space. But the truth is, the more emotionally invested a man becomes before he feels stable in himself, the more likely he is to retreat temporarily. This is why emotionally secure women don't try to tighten the connection when a man pulls away. They don't over-explain. They don't negotiate closeness. They allow him to recalibrate while staying rooted in their own lives. Here's what creates attraction instead of resistance. When a man steps back and sees that you are still whole, still calm, still moving forward, not frozen in waiting mode, something shifts inside him. He no longer feels like intimacy equals loss. He starts to feel that intimacy can coexist with freedom. And this is powerful because the moment a man realizes he doesn't have to disappear to remain himself, he stops running. So if a man pulls away during a phase of emotional deepening, don't immediately assume disinterest. Ask a quieter question instead. Does he know who he is yet? And more importantly, do you? When you stay connected to your own rhythm, purpose, and emotional center, you don't chase men back. You invite them forward on their own terms. And that changes the entire dynamic. Third, one of the most misunderstood reasons men pull away is this. A man withdraws when he feels emotionally evaluated rather than emotionally accepted. This is subtle, and most women don't realize when it's happening. As a man, I can tell you that many of us are highly sensitive to the feeling of being measured, not judged out loud, but silently assessed. When a connection deepens, some women begin to watch more closely. They notice patterns. They track consistency. They mentally compare what he says today to what he said last week. None of this is done with bad intention. It's usually driven by a desire for safety. But here's what happens on his side. He starts to feel like he's on emotional probation, that every interaction carries weight, that a wrong tone, a late reply, or a moment of distraction could shift the entire dynamic. And when a man feels he must constantly perform emotionally to maintain closeness, his nervous system looks for relief. That relief often comes in the form of distance. This doesn't mean he doesn't care. It means he no longer feels relaxed being himself. He feels observed rather than received. And when a man doesn't feel safe to be imperfect, inconsistent, or human, he pulls away instead of opening up. Many women mistake emotional evaluation for emotional communication. They think asking for clarity, reassurance, or explanations will bring closeness back. But when those requests come from anxiety rather than grounded presence, a man doesn't hear love, he hears pressure. Let me give you a real-life emotional scenario. A man shares something personal, maybe a doubt, a fear, or an unfinished part of his life. The woman listens, but inside she starts thinking, is this a red flag? Does this mean he's not ready? Should I be worried? She may not say it directly, but her energy shifts. He feels it immediately. Men are extremely sensitive to changes in emotional temperature. Once he senses that vulnerability leads to scrutiny instead of softness, he learns a quiet lesson. It's safer to say less, and saying less eventually becomes pulling away. Here's the empowering truth for you. A woman doesn't create emotional safety by asking the right questions at the right time. She creates it by being emotionally steady, by allowing space for imperfection, by not turning every moment into a test of the future. When a man feels emotionally accepted, not constantly evaluated, he relaxes. And relaxed men don't pull away. They stay. They open. They lean in. This is why the most magnetic women are not the ones who demand emotional certainty, but the ones who remain calm in emotional ambiguity. They don't rush connection. They let it unfold. And in doing so, they signal something powerful. I trust myself enough not to control you. When a man senses that trust, he stops retreating. Because distance was never about you needing to be more. It was about him needing room to be human without fear. Fourth, another deep reason men pull away, one that women rarely consider, is the fear of disappointing you. This might surprise you because distance often looks like indifference, but very often it comes from the opposite place. When a man truly cares, he becomes aware of your expectations long before you voice them. He notices your hopes. He senses what you're emotionally investing in him. And if, deep down, he is unsure he can fully meet those expectations, anxiety begins to grow. Men are taught from a young age that their value comes from what they can provide, protect, or sustain. So when a man feels that a woman sees potential in him that he hasn't yet embodied, it can trigger shame rather than motivation. He starts to think, what if I can't be the man she thinks I am? Instead of expressing this fear, which would require vulnerability, many men choose silence. Distance becomes a shield. If he pulls away now, he won't have to face the moment where he lets you down later. From your side, this feels confusing and painful. You might think, if he cared, he would try harder. But from his side, trying harder feels risky, because trying and failing would confirm his worst fear, that he is not enough. So he withdraws before that moment arrives. This is why some men disappear just as things start to feel meaningful. Not at the beginning, not when everything is light and easy, but right when emotional depth appears, right when the connection starts to matter. Here's where your power comes in. A woman who understands this dynamic doesn't rush to reassure a man with words. She doesn't lower her standards or explain herself into smaller expectations. Instead, she holds emotional steadiness. She remains warm, but not needy. Open, but not dependent. Why does this work? Because it removes the pressure of performance. It shows him that connection does not equal constant proof, that he is allowed to grow into the role, not audition for it under pressure. Men return when they feel capable, not when they feel chased. And here's something important I want you to hear. A man who pulls away because he fears disappointing you is telling you something valuable. He is revealing his current emotional capacity, not his future potential, his present readiness. Your job is not to convince him. Your job is to observe. When you stop trying to emotionally rescue men from their insecurities, you step into a different level of power. You no longer relate from hope alone. You relate from self-respect. And self-respect quietly changes everything. Fifth, there is another reason men pull away that many women overlook, because it hides behind something that looks like stability. A man can pull away when consistency starts to feel like a trap instead of a choice. At the beginning of a connection, everything feels voluntary. He calls because he wants to. He shows up because it feels natural. There is excitement, curiosity, movement. But over time, if consistency quietly turns into expectation, something inside him tightens. Not because commitment is bad, but because obligation without emotional readiness creates resistance. Men need to feel that their presence is desired, not required. The moment a man feels that he has to show up in a certain way to maintain peace, approval, or emotional balance, he starts to associate closeness with pressure. This doesn't mean you asked for too much. Often, you didn't ask at all. It's the unspoken contract that forms: regular good morning messages, predictable routines, emotional availability that becomes assumed rather than appreciated. From your side, this feels like security. From his side, if he isn't fully anchored yet, it can feel like being slowly boxed in. So he creates distance, not to escape you, but to escape the feeling of being locked into a role he didn't consciously choose. Here's the important distinction. Men don't fear commitment as much as they fear losing agency. When a man feels his choices are still his own, consistency feels empowering. When he feels consistency is expected, monitored, or emotionally enforced, it feels heavy. This is why some men pull away right when things start to feel normal. And this is where emotionally mature women shift the dynamic. They don't punish distance. They don't tighten control. They don't demand reassurance. Instead, they reintroduce choice into the connection. They allow space without resentment. They stay warm without chasing. They continue living fully rather than structuring their emotional life around his availability. And something powerful happens. A man who senses that his presence is welcomed but not required relaxes. He no longer feels trapped. He feels invited. And invited men come closer willingly. This is not about playing games or pretending not to care. It's about maintaining your own emotional independence so connection remains alive instead of obligatory. When consistency is freely given, it builds attraction. When it feels enforced, it creates withdrawal. So if a man pulls away during a phase of routine, don't immediately ask what went wrong. Ask instead whether the relationship still feels like a choice for both of you. Because real commitment doesn't grow under pressure, it grows in emotional freedom. Sixth, another reason men pull away is one many women don't like to hear at first, but it's important to understand it without judgment. A man can pull away when he feels he has already won the emotional connection. This doesn't mean he no longer values you. It means the dynamic has shifted from discovery to certainty too quickly. Men are wired to respond to movement. When there is curiosity, mystery, emotional space, a man leans in naturally. But when everything becomes fully available too soon, emotionally, energetically, mentally, some men stop leaning forward because there is nothing left to move toward. From your side, openness feels like honesty. Giving feels like love. Consistency feels like security. And all of that is beautiful when it's balanced. But when a man feels he has full emotional access to you before he has invested enough himself, something subtle changes inside him. He stops wondering. He stops pursuing. He stops feeling the gentle tension that keeps attraction alive. So he pulls away, not consciously, not cruelly, but because the emotional dynamic no longer asks anything of him. Here's where women often misunderstand this situation. They think, if I show him how much I care, he will feel safe and commit. But safety without challenge can create stagnation, and stagnation leads to distance. This is not about withholding love or becoming cold. It's about pacing emotional availability so it grows with the connection, not ahead of it. A man bonds deeply through investment, through effort, through choosing. When he hasn't yet had to choose you consciously, when everything is already given, he may feel emotionally full without feeling emotionally anchored. And men don't stay where they feel full but not grounded. This is why emotionally mature women don't rush emotional exposure. They don't place their entire heart on the table early. They allow the man to meet them step by step, not all at once. When a man feels he is earning closeness rather than receiving it by default, his respect deepens. His presence stabilizes. His desire becomes intentional instead of passive. So if a man pulls away after a phase where you gave a lot, emotionally, attentively, consistently, don't blame yourself. Instead, recognize the imbalance. Pulling back slightly is not manipulation. It's self-regulation. You don't remove love. You restore rhythm. And when rhythm returns, attraction often does too. Because men don't pull away from women they are curious about. They pull away from dynamics that no longer invite them forward. Seventh, another reason men pull away is when they feel loved but not respected. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics between men and women, because many women believe love automatically communicates respect. For men, it doesn't. A man can feel cared for, supported, emotionally held, and still feel diminished. Respect to a man is about how he is seen. It's about whether his decisions are trusted, his boundaries are honored, and his autonomy is acknowledged. When a man feels that his choices are constantly questioned, corrected, or emotionally challenged, even with good intentions, something inside him shuts down. From your perspective, you may think you're helping, offering advice, checking in, wanting clarity, wanting alignment. But from his perspective, repeated emotional input can feel like a quiet message. I don't fully trust you to lead yourself. And when a man feels that way, he doesn't argue. He doesn't explain. He withdraws. Men rarely pull away because they feel unloved. They pull away because they feel subtly disempowered. This often shows up in small moments. You ask why he made a certain decision. You suggest a better way. You remind him of something he forgot. You express concern about his pace, his priorities, his direction. None of this is cruel, but over time, it creates an emotional atmosphere where he feels managed rather than met. And a man who feels managed doesn't feel desire. He feels resistance. Here's what many women don't realize. Respect doesn't mean silence, and it doesn't mean submission. It means allowing a man the dignity of his own process, even when you don't fully understand it, even when it looks different from how you would do things. When a man feels respected, his nervous system relaxes. He feels safe to stay. He feels seen as capable. And capable men don't pull away. They step up. This is why the most magnetic women don't try to shape men emotionally. They don't mold, correct, or guide unless invited. They express themselves clearly, but they don't hover. They allow men to feel like men. And here's the empowering part for you. When you stop overfunctioning emotionally, you reclaim your own energy. You stop carrying the relationship on your shoulders. You stop monitoring, fixing, or adjusting. You become present instead of preoccupied. And presence is powerful. A man who feels both loved and respected doesn't need distance. He doesn't need space to recover his sense of self. He feels whole inside the connection. So, if a man pulls away, ask yourself gently, not with blame, does he feel admired for who he is, or managed for who he should become? That answer often reveals more than any conversation ever could. Eighth, one of the most important distinctions women need to understand is this: not all distance means the same thing. There is a difference between a man who pulls away to regulate himself and a man who is slowly leaving. From the outside, both can look identical. Fewer messages, less initiative, more silence. And because silence triggers anxiety, many women react before understanding which situation they're in. A man who pauses is usually still emotionally present, even if he's quieter. His tone remains warm. His energy is not defensive. When he does reach out, it feels genuine, not forced. He hasn't disconnected. He's recalibrating. A man who is leaving, on the other hand, slowly removes emotional access. His replies become neutral. His presence feels empty. He avoids depth. He avoids future-oriented conversations. And most importantly, he stops responding to your emotional cues altogether. This distinction matters because the way you respond determines what happens next. When a man is pausing, pressure pushes him further away. When a man is leaving, pressure doesn't bring him back either. It only prolongs your confusion. Here's where emotionally strong women shift their approach. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't interrogate distance. They observe patterns calmly. They watch behavior over time instead of reacting to single moments. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. A woman who stays centered during uncertainty sends a powerful signal: I can handle reality. And men respond very differently to women who don't panic when energy shifts. If he is pausing, your steadiness allows him to return without defensiveness. He doesn't feel chased or cornered. He feels space to re-enter on his own terms. If he is leaving, your steadiness protects you. It stops you from over-investing in someone who is already emotionally gone. It keeps your dignity intact. This is where true empowerment lives. You don't need to guess, decode, or chase clarity. Time reveals everything, if you allow it to. Distance is not the enemy. Confusion is. And confusion only lasts when you fight silence instead of listening to it. Men communicate loudly through behavior. When you stop trying to interpret every word and start trusting patterns, you gain emotional authority. A man who wants to stay will adjust. A man who doesn't will fade. Your job is not to force either outcome. Your job is to stay grounded enough to recognize which one you're experiencing and strong enough to respond accordingly. Ninth, one of the fastest ways to turn temporary distance into permanent separation is emotional chasing. And I want to explain this to you honestly, without judgment, because many women chase from fear, not from weakness. When a man pulls away, the instinct to reach for connection is natural. You want clarity, you want reassurance, you want to feel close again. So you ask questions, send messages, try to talk things through. From your side, this feels like communication. From his side, it often feels like pressure. Men don't respond well to being emotionally pursued when they are already retreating. The more you move toward them during that moment, the more they feel the need to move away to regain balance. This creates a painful loop. You feel him slipping, so you lean in. He feels pressure, so he creates space. You feel anxiety, so you reach again. He feels overwhelmed, so he distances further. What started as a small pause turns into a full emotional gap. Here's the hard truth most women aren't told. Chasing doesn't make a man feel chosen. It makes him feel responsible for your emotional stability, and responsibility without desire creates avoidance. This doesn't mean you should become silent out of strategy or play games. It means you regulate yourself first before trying to regulate the relationship. Emotionally strong women don't chase clarity when emotions are high. They create space for truth to surface naturally. They allow silence to reveal intention, and they don't abandon themselves to keep someone close. When you stop chasing, something important happens. If a man was simply overwhelmed, he feels relief. The pressure lifts. He feels free to come back without feeling trapped or managed. If a man was already disengaging, your lack of pursuit protects you. It stops you from overinvesting in someone who isn't meeting you emotionally. Either way, you win. Chasing feels active, but it's actually reactive. It comes from fear of loss. Stillness, on the other hand, comes from self-trust, and self-trust is deeply attractive. A man is far more likely to return to a woman who remains emotionally grounded than to one who collapses into urgency. So when distance appears, resist the urge to close it immediately. Let the space speak. Let his actions show you who he is in that moment. You don't need to convince a man to choose you. You need to observe whether he does. And the moment you stop chasing, you step back into your power. 10th, the final truth about why men pull away is this. Sometimes his distance is not a message about him. It's an invitation for you. Not an invitation to wait. Not an invitation to suffer quietly, but an invitation to return to yourself. When a man pulls away, your attention naturally moves outward. You start monitoring his behavior, his tone, his timing. Your emotional center shifts from your own life to his availability, and without realizing it, your power leaks. Distance exposes this pattern, and that's why it feels so uncomfortable. A man pulling away forces a woman to confront a question she may have been postponing. Am I anchored in my own worth, or am I anchored in his attention? This is not a punishment, it's information. Men don't always pull away to test you, but distance always reveals where you stand with yourself. It shows you whether your sense of value comes from within or from being chosen. Emotionally mature women don't use a man's withdrawal as a reason to freeze their lives. They don't wait in emotional suspension. They keep moving. They stay connected to their goals, their rhythm, their joy, their friendships, their bodies. And something important happens when they do. A man who was unsure suddenly feels the shift. The emotional gravity changes. He no longer feels like the center of your stability, and that alone can reignite attraction, not because you withdrew to manipulate, but because you return to yourself. And if he doesn't come back, then his distance has done you a favor, because the purpose of understanding men is not to hold on to the wrong one longer. It's to recognize sooner who can meet you at your level of emotional maturity. A man who is capable of connection does not disappear indefinitely. He recalibrates, then returns with clarity. A man who cannot meet you will fade, no matter how much you explain, love, or wait. Your strength is not in preventing men from pulling away. Your strength is in knowing that you remain whole when they do. Distance stops being terrifying when you trust yourself. And when you trust yourself, you stop chasing answers because your life no longer pauses for someone else's uncertainty. If there is one thing I want you to remember from this series, it's this. A man pulling away is not a verdict on your worth. It is a moment of truth. Truth about his emotional capacity, truth about your self-respect, truth about whether the connection is built on fear or freedom. You don't need to hold tighter. You don't need to become colder. You don't need to change who you are. You need to stay grounded. When you remain calm, present, and rooted in yourself, you stop reacting to distance and start seeing clearly. And clarity is power. The right man doesn't stay because you chased him. He stays because he recognizes a woman who does not abandon herself. And that kind of woman is unforgettable.